The morning sun struggled to penetrate the thick gray clouds hanging over Manhattan, casting the city in a muted, almost melancholic light. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office on the 42nd floor of the Moretti Tower, the view stretched endlessly, the sprawling concrete jungle below, the Hudson River glinting dully in the distance, and the endless stream of people rushing through their lives, unaware of the empire that watched over them from above. Emily Carter stood by those windows, a leather-bound portfolio tucked under her arm, her hazel eyes scanning the cityscape with the kind of quiet observation that had become second nature to her. She'd learned, over the past 3 years, that in Dante Moretti's world, awareness meant survival. Not that she was in any direct danger. Her role as his executive secretary kept her firmly in the administrative realm, handling schedules, managing communications, and serving as the perfectly professional buffer between Dante and the outside world. But she knew. She'd always known what kind of man she worked for. The door to the private elevator chimed softly, and Emily turned, her posture straightening instinctively. Dante Moretti stepped into the office, his presence immediately commanding the space in that effortless way he had. At 38, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd built an empire from the ground up. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed impeccably in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp and clean-shaven, and his eyes, those piercing gray eyes, held a coldness that could freeze a room. "Good morning, Mr. Moretti," Emily said, her voice calm and professional, the same greeting she'd offered every morning for 3 years. "Emily," he acknowledged her with a slight nod, already moving toward his desk, a massive piece of dark walnut that dominated the office. "What's on the agenda?" She followed him, opening the portfolio as she walked. "You have a conference call with the Chicago office at 9:30. The quarterly reports came in. I've flagged the sections that need your immediate attention. At 11, you're meeting with the Castellano representatives to discuss the waterfront development project." Dante's expression didn't change, but Emily noticed the slight tension in his shoulders at the mention of the Castellanos. In 3 years, she'd learned to read his micro-expressions, the tiny tells that most people missed. "The Castellanos," he repeated, his voice neutral. "Victor confirmed they're coming personally?" "Yes, sir. Victor Castellano and 2 of his associates. They requested the meeting be held here rather than at their offices downtown." Dante's fingers drummed once against the desk, a rare display of contemplation. "Interesting. What else?" "Lunch is scheduled with the mayor's office representative at 1. They want to discuss the rezoning proposal for the East Side development. And at 4, you have a strategy session with Marcus and the legal team regarding the Harbor Point acquisition." "Cancel lunch," Dante said, settling into his chair. "Reschedule it for next week. I want Marcus in on the Castellano meeting." Emily made a note on her tablet. "I'll inform him immediately. Would you like me to sit in on the meeting?" Dante looked up at her, and for just a moment something flickered in those gray eyes, something almost like concern, though it vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "No, I need you to handle the Chicago call if it runs long, but I want you nearby. If anything seems off about this meeting, I want you aware of it." It was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging the undercurrent of danger that sometimes rippled through his business dealings. Emily simply nodded. Understood. The morning progressed with its usual efficiency. Emily managed the Chicago call, which did indeed run long, handling questions about revenue streams and operational expansions with the kind of competence that had made her invaluable to Dante. She'd started as a temp, fresh out of college with a degree in business administration and drowning in student debt. The agency had warned her that Dante Moretti was difficult, that assistance rarely lasted more than a few months. But Emily had lasted, not by being intimidated, but by being excellent at her job. She anticipated his needs, managed his schedule with military precision, and never, not once, asked questions about the parts of his business that didn't concern her. She knew what Dante Moretti was. She'd known from the beginning when she'd seen the way men looked at him with a mixture of respect and fear, when she'd noticed the careful language used in certain meetings, when she'd observed the high-level security that surrounded him at all times. Dante Moretti wasn't just a successful real estate developer and businessman. He was the head of one of New York's most powerful organized crime families, a fact that was whispered about but never proven, hidden behind layers of legitimate businesses and legal protections. And somehow, impossibly, Emily had fallen in love with him. She'd never acted on it, of course. She was too professional for that, too aware of the massive gulf between their worlds. She was the secretary. He was Dante Moretti. She'd watched him from afar, managing his life with careful efficiency while keeping her own feelings locked away in a place so deep she sometimes almost forgot they existed. Almost. At 10:45, Marcus Romano arrived, Dante's right hand, a man in his mid-40s with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He greeted Emily with his usual courtesy. "Ms. Carter, how are you this morning?" "Well, thank you, Marcus. Mr. Moretti is expecting you. The Castellano meeting is in 15 minutes. Marcus nodded but paused before heading into the office. "Emily, do me a favor. Stay alert today, would you?" It was unusual for Marcus to say something like that to her. She met his gaze steadily. "Is there something I should know?" Just, stay alert. Trust your instincts." He offered her a tight smile before disappearing into Dante's office. Emily returned to her desk, but Marcus's words had planted a seed of unease in her chest. She tried to shake it off, focusing on answering emails and coordinating with various department heads, but the feeling persisted. At 11 o'clock precisely, the elevator chimed again. Victor Castellano entered with 2 men flanking him. Emily recognized Victor from photographs. He was in his 50s, shorter than Dante, but powerfully built, with olive skin and calculating dark eyes. His associates were younger, both wearing expensive suits, both with the kind of alert posture that suggested military or security training. "Mr. Castellano," Emily greeted him professionally, rising from her desk. "Mr. Moretti is expecting you. May I offer you coffee or water?" "Coffee. Black," Victor said, his eyes sweeping over her with the kind of dismissive assessment that made her feel like furniture. His associates didn't speak. Emily prepared the coffee service with practiced efficiency, using the premium blend Dante kept for important meetings. As she arranged the cups on a tray, she studied the 3 men through her peripheral vision. Something felt wrong. She couldn't pinpoint what exactly, but that instinct Marcus had mentioned was screaming at her. The way Victor's associates stood wasn't quite right. They weren't positioned like bodyguards. They were positioned like they were preparing for something. Emily's heart rate picked up, but she kept her expression neutral. She carried the tray toward Dante's office, where the door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could hear voices. "Appreciate you coming personally, Victor," Dante was saying, his tone cordial but with that underlying edge of steel that was always present in his business dealings. "Of course, Dante. This project is too important to handle through intermediaries," Victor replied smoothly. Emily knocked softly and entered, Marcus holding the door open for her. She set the tray on the conference table where the 4 men were gathered, pouring coffee with steady hands despite the anxiety crawling up her spine. "Thank you, Emily," Dante said, not looking at her. His attention was fixed on the documents spread across the table, blueprints for the waterfront development. She nodded and turned to leave, but as she did, she caught something. A look exchanged between Victor and one of his associates, a barely perceptible nod, and then she saw it, the subtle movement of the associate's hand toward the inside of his jacket. Time seemed to slow. Every self-defense course she'd ever taken, every safety briefing she'd sat through, every instinct in her body screamed the same thing. Gun. Emily's mind raced. She could scream, alert Dante and Marcus, but would that be fast enough? The man's hand was already moving, already reaching. In the split second she had to make a decision, only one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Not him. I won't let them take him. The man's hand emerged from his jacket, metal glinting. Emily didn't think. She simply moved. She lunged forward, putting herself directly between the gunman and Dante, her arms spreading wide as if she could somehow shield him with her body. She heard shouts, Dante's voice sharp with alarm, Marcus yelling something, and then the world exploded into sound and sensation. The impact hit her like a freight train, punching into her left shoulder and spinning her backward. There was no pain at first, just shock and the strange sensation of losing control of her body. She fell, the floor rushing up to meet her, and distantly she heard more chaos erupting, furniture crashing, men shouting, the horrible sound of a struggle. Then the pain came, white-hot and all-consuming, radiating from her shoulder through her entire body. She tried to breathe, but her lungs wouldn't cooperate. The ceiling above her swam in and out of focus, and then Dante's face appeared above her, his expression completely transformed. The cold, controlled businessman was gone. In his place was something raw and terrified, his gray eyes wide with an emotion she'd never seen there before. "Emily." His hands were on her, pressing against her shoulder, and she dimly realized he was trying to stop the flow of her life draining away. "Emily, stay with me. Look at me. Stay with me." She tried to speak, to tell him she was okay, but words wouldn't form. Behind him she could hear Marcus on the phone, his voice urgent. "We need an ambulance at Moretti Tower, 42nd floor, now. Gunshot wound, female victim. She's conscious, but, Emily, listen to me." Dante's voice cut through the fog, threatening to pull her under. His hand cupped her face, forcing her to focus on him. "You're going to be fine. Do you hear me? You're going to be fine. Just hold on." She'd never heard him sound like this. Desperate, almost pleading. She wanted to tell him not to worry, that it had been worth it, that she'd do it again in a heartbeat. But her vision was darkening at the edges, and she was so tired. "Why?" Dante's voice cracked, and impossibly she saw wetness in his eyes. "Why did you do that? Emilie, why?" "Because I love you," she thought, but couldn't say. "Because in this entire cruel world you're the only thing that matters to me. Because I'd rather die than watch you leave it." "Sir, we need to move her," someone was saying. One of the security team that must have flooded in after the shot. "We can't wait for the ambulance. We need to get her to the hospital now. Then we move her. Now." Dante's voice had shifted, taking on the commanding tone she knew so well, but it was layered with something else. Fear. "Get the car. Marcus, clear the route. Nobody stops us." She felt herself being lifted, cradled against Dante's chest. He was carrying her himself, she realized dimly, not delegating to his security team. His suit jacket was gone, she noticed. He must have used it to try to stop the flow from her wound. "Stay with me, Emilie," he kept repeating as he moved, each step careful despite his urgency. "Stay with me. I've got you. I won't let you go." The elevator ride was a blur. She was aware of movement, of Dante's heart pounding beneath her ear, of his voice continuing to murmur to her, words she couldn't quite make out but that sounded almost like prayers. The lobby must have been cleared because she didn't hear the usual bustle of people, just rapid footsteps, doors opening, and then the cool air of outside hitting her face. Rain had started falling. She could feel droplets on her skin, could hear it pattering against the pavement. "Careful!" Dante barked at someone as she was transferred into a vehicle. His personal car, she thought. The black SUV he used when he didn't want to draw attention. He slid in beside her, keeping her cradled against him, his hand pressed firmly against her shoulder. The vehicle lurched into motion, and through the haze of pain, Emilie heard Dante giving terse orders to the driver. "Mount Sinai, west side entrance. Call ahead. I want their best trauma surgeon ready." "Sir, they're asking about the nature of the injury." "Gunshot wound, left shoulder. She's lost a significant amount of blood, but she's still conscious." Dante's voice was clinical, almost detached, but his hand tightened around Emilie. "Tell them if she doesn't get immediate care, I will burn that hospital to the ground." It should have scared her, that casual threat of violence. Instead, she found it almost comforting. This was Dante being Dante, taking control, demanding the impossible, bending the world to his will. "Emilie," his voice dropped, meant only for her. She forced her eyes open, meeting his gaze. "Why did you do it?" She managed to move her lips, pushing out words that were barely a whisper. "Had to. Protect you." Something broke in his expression. "You foolish, brave, impossible woman, I'm not worth protecting. Not like that. Not at the cost of—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "You're going to survive this. Do you understand me? You don't get to leave, I won't allow it." Despite everything, despite the pain consuming her body, Emilie felt her lips curve slightly. Even now, Dante Moretti was giving orders to the universe itself. The hospital came into view, and the SUV screeched to a halt at an entrance where a trauma team was already waiting. Dante carried her out himself, refusing to let the paramedics take her until he'd personally placed her on the gurney. "Gunshot wound, left shoulder, approximately 15 minutes ago," he reported with the precision of someone used to giving critical information under pressure. "She's been in and out of consciousness. Pulse is weak, but steady." A doctor, young, female, competent-looking, nodded sharply. "We'll take it from here, Mr. Moretti. I'm coming with her." "Sir, I'm sorry, but we can't allow—" "I'm coming with her." It wasn't a request. His hand was still holding Emilie's, and she could feel the slight tremor in it, the only outward sign of how affected he truly was. The doctor seemed to recognize that arguing was futile. "Fine, but you'll have to stay back and let us work." They rushed through corridors that blurred together, Medical personnel calling out numbers and terms that Emily only partially understood. She kept her eyes on Dante, using his face as an anchor to stay conscious. He walked alongside the gurney, never releasing her hand, his expression set in grim determination. At the entrance to the operating room, they finally had to separate them. A nurse, kind-faced, with gentle hands, carefully extracted Emily's hand from Dante's. "We'll take excellent care of her, Mr. Moretti," the nurse promised. "But you need to let us work now." Dante looked like he wanted to argue, to demand the impossible again, but instead, he leaned down close to Emily's ear. "Fight," he whispered, his voice rough. "You fight to come back to me, Emily Carter. That's an order." She wanted to respond, to promise him she would, but the darkness was pulling too strongly now. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was Dante's face, transformed by an emotion she'd never thought to see there. He looked completely, utterly lost. The waiting room of Mount Sinai's surgical wing had never held Dante Moretti before. He was a man used to penthouse offices and private clubs, to places where he controlled every variable, but now he sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his hands clasped between his knees, staring at nothing. He was still covered in her blood. It had dried on his hands, stained his white shirt, marked him in a way that made him feel sick to his core. Marcus had arrived within 20 minutes, along with 3 of Dante's most trusted security personnel. They'd taken up positions around the waiting area, a protective circle that kept the curious at bay and ensured privacy. "What happened to the Castellanos?" Dante asked, his voice flat. Marcus settled into the chair beside him. "The shooter is in custody. Our custody. Victor and his other associate tried to run. They didn't make it out of the building. They're also secured." Dante nodded slowly. "Good. I want to know everything. Who ordered it? Why? What they hope to accomplish. Everything." "We're already working on it," Marcus assured him. "But Dante, right now that's not what matters. What matters is that a woman threw herself in front of a projectile meant for me." Dante cut him off, his voice suddenly sharp. "What matters is that my secretary, a civilian who had nothing to do with any of this, is in surgery right now because I failed to protect her. You didn't know. I should have known." Dante surged to his feet, unable to sit still any longer. Victor Castellano requesting a meeting here instead of neutral ground, wanting to discuss the waterfront project in person when we'd been negotiating through channels for weeks. I should have seen it. I should have known something was wrong. Marcus remained silent, knowing that Dante needed to work through this. 3 years, Dante continued, pacing the small waiting area. 3 years she's worked for me. 3 years of perfect efficiency, perfect discretion, perfect... He stopped, running his hand through his hair, a gesture so unlike his usual composure that Marcus's eyebrows rose. "And I never protected her, never thought she might need protecting. She was just there, part of the office, part of my day." "That's not true," Marcus said quietly. "You've always been careful about her safety. The security protocols, the background checks on anyone who comes into contact with her, clearly not careful enough." Dante's voice was bitter. "She threw herself in front of a weapon, Marcus, without hesitation, without thinking. She just moved." He closed his eyes, and the image played again behind his eyelids. Emily's hazel eyes widening, her body moving, putting herself between him and danger. Why would she do that? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, carefully, "Maybe you should ask her that, when she wakes up. If she wakes up." "When?" Marcus corrected firmly. "Dante, you know as well as I do that Emily Carter isn't the type to give up. She's one of the strongest people I've ever met, even if that strength is quiet." Dante wanted to believe that, but the image of her on the floor, her blood pooling beneath her skin going pale, her eyes struggling to focus, it haunted him. Hours passed. Dante refused to leave, refused to eat, refused to do anything but wait. Marcus managed the crisis from the waiting room, making quiet phone calls, coordinating with their people, ensuring that the rest of Dante's business empire continued functioning, even as its leader sat frozen. As night fell over the city, a surgeon finally emerged, still in scrubs. Dante was on his feet instantly. "Mr. Moretti, how is she?" The surgeon, Dr. Patricia Chen, according to her ID badge, looked tired but offered a small smile. "She's stable. The surgery went well. The projectile entered her left shoulder, missing the major arteries but causing significant tissue damage. We've repaired what we could, but she'll need extensive physical therapy to regain full function of that arm. But she'll live. Dante's voice was barely above a whisper. She'll live, Dr. Chen confirmed. She lost a lot of blood, and the next 48 hours are critical, but barring complications, she should make a full recovery. The relief that flooded through Dante was so intense it nearly buckled his knees. Marcus's hand appeared on his shoulder, steadying him. When can I see her? Dante asked. She's in recovery now. She'll be moved to ICU within the hour. Normally we only allow immediate family, but given the circumstances, Dr. Chen glanced at the security detail, clearly understanding that Dante Moretti wasn't someone who accepted normal restrictions. I'll make sure you're allowed in. But Mr. Moretti, she's going to be unconscious for several more hours. The anesthesia alone. I don't care. I need to see her. Dr. Chen nodded. A nurse will come get you when she's settled. 45 minutes later, Dante stood beside Emily's bed in the ICU. She looked impossibly fragile against the white sheets, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face pale. Machines beeped softly around her, monitoring her vital signs, and an IV drip fed fluids into her arm. Her left shoulder was heavily bandaged and her arm was secured against her chest. But she was breathing, alive. Dante sank into the chair beside her bed, his legs finally giving out after hours of tension. He'd sent Marcus home, sent the security team to their posts. It was just the two of them now, in this quiet room with its sterile smell and soft lighting. He reached out, carefully taking her right hand in both of his. Her skin was cool but not cold, her pulse steady beneath his fingers. Emily, he said softly, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. You foolish, brave woman. What were you thinking? But he knew. Even as he asked, he knew. She'd been thinking the same thing he would have thought if their positions were reversed, that some things were worth protecting regardless of the cost. The realization settled over him like a weight. For 3 years, Emily Carter had been a constant in his life, not just his secretary, but the person who knew his schedule better than he did, who anticipated his needs, who made his chaotic world run smoothly. She'd been there through business crises and personal storms, always calm, always capable, always there, and he'd taken it for granted, taken her for granted. I'm sorry, he whispered, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I didn't see what you were willing to do. I'm sorry I didn't what? Tell her she mattered? Tell her that somewhere along the way, between the morning greetings and the late-night work sessions, between her quiet competence and her subtle smiles, she'd become essential to him in a way that had nothing to do with work. Dante Moretti had built his empire on knowing what he wanted and taking it. But sitting here, holding the hand of a woman who'd taken a projectile for him, he realized he'd been a fool. He'd known what he wanted for longer than he'd admitted to himself. He'd just been too controlled, too careful, too afraid of the one thing he couldn't command: human connection. Real, genuine connection with someone who saw past the power and the reputation to the man underneath. When you wake up, he said, his voice rough, things are going to change, Emily. I'm going to make sure you're protected, really protected. And I'm going to tell you. He stopped, the words catching in his throat. But she couldn't hear him anyway. There would be time later. First, she just needed to wake up. Dante settled in for what he knew would be a long vigil, never releasing her hand, silently willing her to fight her way back to consciousness, back to him. The first night was the longest of Dante Moretti's life. He sat in that uncomfortable hospital chair, Emily's hand still clasped in his, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Each breath she took felt like a small miracle, a defiance of the universe that had tried to take her from him. The machines around her beeped in their rhythmic pattern, a sound that should have been annoying but instead became a comfort, a reminder that she was still here, still fighting. Dawn broke over New York City, pale winter light filtering through the hospital room window. Dante hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that moment again, the man's hand reaching into his jacket, Emily's body moving, the impact that had stolen her from consciousness. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. A nurse entered, the same kind-faced woman from the night before, her name tag reading, Sarah Mitchell, RN. Mr. Moretti, she said gently. I need to check her vitals and change her IV. You're welcome to step out for a moment, grab some coffee. I'm staying. His voice was rough from disuse but firm. Sarah nodded as if she'd expected nothing less. She moved around the bed with practiced efficiency, checking monitors, adjusting tubes, making notes on a tablet. Her numbers look good, she said, and Dante felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. Dr. Chen will be by on her rounds in about an hour, but so far everything is progressing as we'd hope. When will she wake up? It varies by patient. The anesthesia should be wearing off, but her body has been through significant trauma. Sometimes the brain keeps us under a bit longer to allow for healing. Sarah's expression was sympathetic. But I've seen the way you're holding her hand, and I've been doing this long enough to know that connection matters. Keep talking to her. Even if she can't respond, she might hear you. After Sarah left, Dante found himself studying Emily's face more carefully. In 3 years of working together, he'd looked at her thousands of times, but always in the context of work. Always with that professional distance he maintained with everyone. Now, with that distance stripped away by crisis, he really saw her. She had a small scar on her left eyebrow, barely visible, a light dusting of freckles across her nose that her makeup usually concealed, laugh lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of a warmth she often kept hidden behind professional courtesy. She was beautiful. He'd always known that in an abstract way, but it was more than that. There was something inherently good about Amelie Carter, something pure that had survived despite working in his dark world. I never told you about the first day you started working for me, Dante said quietly, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Do you remember it? Of course she couldn't answer, but talking felt necessary, like he was tethering her to consciousness through words. You wore a navy blue suit, conservative, professional. You were 22 years old and looked terrified, though you tried to hide it. The temp agency had sent 3 assistants before you, and all 3 had quit within the first week. I wasn't expecting you to last either. He paused, a faint smile touching his lips at the memory. You sat down at that desk, and the first thing you did was reorganize my entire filing system, without asking, without permission. When I came out of my office and demanded to know what you were doing, you looked me straight in the eye and said, Mr. Moretti, with all due respect, your organizational system was inefficient. I've implemented a new structure that will reduce retrieval time by approximately 40%. Would you like me to explain the methodology? It had been the audacity that had caught his attention. Everyone else treated him with fear or sycophantic deference. But this young woman fresh out of college had looked at his chaos and simply fixed it, without fear, without asking for approval. I should have fired you on the spot for that level of insubordination, Dante continued, his voice soft. Instead, I told you that you had until the end of the day to prove your system worked better than mine. Do you remember what you said? The memory was crystal clear in his mind. Emily had straightened her shoulders, met his challenging gaze, and replied with perfect calm, I won't need until the end of the day, Mr. Moretti. Give me 2 hours and I'll show you that efficiency isn't insubordination. It's excellence. She'd been right, of course. By noon, his office had run more smoothly than it had in months. By the end of the week, he'd made her permanent. By the end of the month, he'd given her a raise and expanded her responsibilities. And somewhere along the way, she'd become indispensable. Marcus arrived at 7:30, carrying a garment bag and a coffee that smelled like the expensive blend from Dante's private reserve. You look terrible, Marcus said bluntly, setting the coffee on the small table beside Dante's chair. Thank you for that observation. I brought you clean clothes. There's a private bathroom down the hall where you can shower and change. When Dante opened his mouth to protest, Marcus held up a hand. She's stable. I'll stay with her. 20 minutes, Dante. You'll be no good to her if you collapse from exhaustion. Dante wanted to argue, but Marcus was right. He was still wearing the blood-stained shirt from yesterday, and he could feel the grime of the hospital settling into his skin. Reluctantly, he released Ameli's hand and stood. If anything changes, you'll know immediately, Marcus promised. The shower was brief and efficient. Dante scrubbed away the physical evidence of yesterday's trauma, though the emotional weight remained. Marcus had brought one of his standard work suits, charcoal gray, white shirt, dark tie. The familiar uniform helped him feel slightly more in control, even as his world remained tilted on its axis. When he returned to the room, Marcus was sitting in the chair Dante had vacated, but his expression had shifted to something more serious. We need to talk about what happens next, Marcus said quietly. Dante reclaimed his position beside Ameli's bed, taking her hand again before responding. Tell me what you've learned. The man who fired the shot is named Carlo Russo. He's a hired contractor, not affiliated with the Castellano family directly, which is interesting. Victor Castellano swears he didn't order the hit, that Russo was inserted into his security detail without his knowledge. Do you believe him? Marcus hesitated. I do, actually. Victor's terrified, and not just of you. Someone set this up to look like a Castellano operation. The question is why, and who benefits from you going after them? Dante's jaw tightened. Someone's trying to start a war. That's my assessment. If you'd retaliated immediately against the Castellanos, the entire power structure of the city would have destabilized. Other families would have taken sides. Alliances would have fractured. In the chaos, someone else makes their move, Dante finished. Who? That's what we're working to find out, but Dante, this was sophisticated. Whoever planned this knew your schedule, knew about the Castellano meeting, knew how to infiltrate Victor's security. That level of inside information suggests someone close to us. Dante's voice was cold. Someone in my organization. The implications of that hung heavy in the air. Dante had built his empire on loyalty and trust, had handpicked everyone in his inner circle. The idea that one of them had betrayed him, had put Emily in danger, made his blood run cold. I want every communication from the past 6 months reviewed, Dante said, his voice taking on the commanding tone that had built his reputation. Every meeting, every phone call, every email. Cross-reference anyone who had knowledge of both my schedule and the Castellano negotiations. And Marcus, I want this done quietly. If there's a traitor, I don't want them knowing we're looking. Already in progress, Marcus assured him. I've pulled in our most trusted people. We're being surgical about it. Good. Dante's thumb traced over Emily's knuckles, a soothing gesture that had become automatic. What about the Castellanos? Victor has offered full cooperation. He's as interested in finding out who compromised his organization as we are. I've proposed a temporary alliance. Share intelligence, coordinate our investigations. He's agreed. It was the smart play, Dante knew, setting aside old rivalries to face a common threat. But trusting Victor Castellano, even temporarily, left a bitter taste in his mouth. Fine, but I want our people verifying everything they give us. No information gets taken at face value. Understood? Marcus stood, preparing to leave. There's one more thing. The media is starting to ask questions. There were witnesses in the building, cleaning staff, security personnel. We've contained most of it, but you know how these things work. Eventually, something will leak. Let me worry about the media, Dante said. Your job is to find who did this. And Marcus, when we find them, I want them handled appropriately. Marcus nodded, understanding the careful language. In Dante's world, handled appropriately meant many things, none of them pleasant. But it was all kept in the shadows, away from public scrutiny, dealt with through channels that maintained plausible deniability. After Marcus left, Dante was alone with Emily again. Dr. Chen made her promised rounds, examining Emily with thorough professionalism. Everything looks good, Mr. Moretti, she said, making notes on her tablet. Her body is responding well to treatment. The wound is showing no signs of infection, and her vitals are stable. I'm optimistic about her recovery. When will she wake up? Barring complications, I'd expect her to regain consciousness within the next 12 to 24 hours. Everyone's different, but her body seems to be healing well. It was good news, but Dante wouldn't truly believe it until he saw Emily's hazel eyes open again. The day passed in a strange, suspended state. Dante conducted business from the hospital room, Marcus bringing him documents to review, updates on various projects, decisions that couldn't wait. But his attention was divided, always circling back to the woman in the bed beside him. Around noon, he found himself talking to her again. Do you remember the Reynolds acquisition? He asked, his voice quiet in the stillness of the room. About 18 months ago, that disaster of a merger that nearly cost us millions? It had been a brutal negotiation. The Reynolds family had wanted to sell their chain of boutique hotels, but the due diligence had revealed problems, structural issues, labor disputes, financial irregularities. Most of Dante's team had advised walking away. You were the one who found the solution, Dante continued. You spent an entire weekend going through the contracts, cross-referencing everything. Monday morning, you walked into my office and laid out a restructuring plan that would address every single issue while still making the acquisition profitable. He remembered the way she'd presented it. Calm, thorough, brilliant. No ego, no demand for recognition. Just pure competence and the quiet confidence that came from knowing she was right. I asked you why you'd done it. The acquisition wasn't your responsibility. You could have let it fail, and no one would have blamed you. Do you remember what you said? Her words echoed in his memory. Because you trusted me with access to the information, Mr. Moretti. That trust isn't something I take lightly. If I can help make this company stronger, why wouldn't I? Trust. It always came back to trust with Emily. She'd never betrayed a confidence, never shared information she shouldn't, never used her position for personal gain. In a world where loyalty was bought and sold, where everyone had an angle, Emily Carter had been refreshingly, frustratingly genuine. I gave you a bonus for that, Dante said. A substantial one. You tried to refuse it, said you were just doing your job. He shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. I had to practically order you to accept it, and then you donated half of it to a scholarship fund for business students. Marcus told me. I think you didn't realize I'd find out. There had been dozens of moments like that over the 3 years. Small things that had added up to paint a picture of who Emily Carter really was. Competent, compassionate, principled. And Dante, fool that he was, had kept her at arm's length, had maintained that professional distance even as he'd relied on her more and more, had told himself that it was appropriate, that it was necessary, that his world was too dangerous to let anyone truly close. Yesterday had proven how wrong he'd been. The danger had found her anyway, and now she was lying in a hospital bed because he hadn't protected her. I'm sorry, he whispered, bringing her hand to his lips. I'm so sorry, Emily. Evening brought another visit from Marcus, this time with more substantive information. We've narrowed it down, he said, keeping his voice low. There are only 3 people who had access to both your schedule and the details of the Castellano negotiation. One of them is me. It's not you, Dante said flatly. I appreciate the vote of confidence, but we need to be thorough. The other 2 are Anthony Ricci from your security detail and James Chen from the legal team. Dante's mind raced through the implications. Anthony had been with him for 5 years, had saved his life on 2 separate occasions. James was newer, only 18 months, but he'd been thoroughly vetted before being brought into the organization. What's your instinct? Dante asked. James, Marcus said immediately. Anthony's loyalty is unquestionable, but James, he's ambitious, smart, always angling for more responsibility, more access. And 6 weeks ago, he took a personal trip to Atlantic City, paid for it with cash, no credit card trail. Could be nothing, but it's suspicious, Dante finished. What do we know about his movements in the past week? He's been careful. Nothing overtly suspicious. But we pulled his phone records. He's been using encrypted messaging apps. Again, not necessarily damning, but combined with everything else. Bring him in, Dante ordered, quietly. I want to talk to him personally. Dante, if he is the leak, confronting him directly, I want to look him in the eye. Dante cut him off. I want to see if he has the audacity to lie to my face. Set it up for tomorrow, somewhere private. And Marcus? I want security there, but out of sight. If he runs, I want him contained immediately. After Marcus left to make the arrangements, Dante returned his attention to Emily. The sun had set, casting the room in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. He'd been here for over 24 hours now, and fatigue was starting to catch up with him, but he refused to leave. You'd tell me I'm being irrational, he said to her sleeping form. You'd probably have already coordinated a rotation of people to keep watch so I could rest. That's what you do. You take care of things. You take care of me even when I don't realize I need it. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. It had been about a year ago, during a particularly stressful acquisition. Dante had been working 18-hour days, barely eating, running on coffee and determination. He'd been in his office late one night when Emily had appeared with a proper meal, not takeout, but something she'd clearly made herself. Chicken soup, fresh bread, a salad. You need to eat, Mr. Moretti, she'd said, setting the food on his desk with that calm authority she wielded so well. Real food, not caffeine and antacids. He'd been irritated at first, ready to dismiss her, but something in her expression had stopped him, a genuine concern that went beyond professional obligation. Did you make this? He'd asked. Yes, my grandmother's recipe. It's good for stress. She'd smiled slightly. Consider it preventive health care. A sick boss is an inefficient boss. He'd eaten the soup and it had been delicious, comforting in a way he hadn't experienced in years. When he'd thanked her the next day, she'd simply nodded and moved on to the next task, as if caring for him was just another item on her checklist. But it wasn't, was it? Dante could see that now. Those little gestures, the meals, the way she'd adjust his schedule to ensure he got enough sleep during crisis periods, the way she'd handle problems before they could reach him. They weren't just professional excellence. They were care, genuine and freely given. And he'd been so focused on maintaining boundaries that he'd never acknowledged it, never let her know that he noticed, that he appreciated it, that somewhere along the way, she'd become more than just his secretary. "When you wake up," Dante said softly, "I'm going to tell you everything. No more professional distance. No more pretending I don't see what you do, who you are. You put yourself in danger for me, Emily. The least I can do is be honest with you about what that means to me." The machines continued their steady beeping. Emily's chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm, and Dante kept vigil, watching over the woman who had become, without either of them quite intending it, the most important person in his life. The second day brought incremental improvements. Dr. Chen reported that Emily's body was healing well, that her vitals continued to strengthen, but she still hadn't woken up, and that worried Dante more than he wanted to admit. "It's normal," Sarah the nurse assured him during one of her regular checks. "Some patients just need more time. Her body went through severe trauma. The brain is protective, it keeps us under until it's convinced we're ready to handle consciousness again. But she will wake up? All signs point to yes, Mr. Moretti. You need to be patient." Patience had never been Dante's strong suit. He was a man of action, someone who shaped the world to his will through force of personality and strategic planning. But here, in this hospital room, he was powerless. All he could do was wait and hope. The meeting with James Chen was scheduled for that afternoon. Dante had Marcus arrange for a trusted nurse to sit with Amelie while he was gone. He refused to leave her completely alone. The meeting location was one of his private properties, a brownstone in Brooklyn that was used for sensitive discussions. James arrived looking nervous, which could mean guilt, or simply the natural anxiety of being summoned by Dante Moretti. He was in his early 30s, well-dressed, with the kind of polished demeanor that came from expensive law schools and corporate training. "James," Dante greeted him, his voice neutral. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, Mr. Moretti. I was sorry to hear about Miss Carter. How is she?" It was the right thing to say, but Dante was listening for more than words. He was watching James's body language, the micro-expressions that could reveal truth or deception. "She's stable, recovering." Dante gestured to a chair. "Please sit. I need to ask you some questions about the Castellano negotiation." James sat, and Dante noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he placed them on the armrests. "Certainly. Whatever you need." "Who knew about the meeting? Specifically, who in our organization had access to the details? Time, location, attendees?" "Well, you and Marcus, obviously. Anthony would have known for security purposes. I was handling the legal documentation, so I knew. And Ms. Carter would have known since she managed your schedule. Anyone else?" James hesitated, and in that hesitation, Dante saw something flicker across his face. "Fear." "James," Dante said quietly, but with an edge that made the younger man flinch. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer, because the consequences of lying to me right now are severe. Do you understand?" Yes, sir." "Did you share information about that meeting with anyone outside our organization?" The color drained from James's face. His hands gripped the armrests tighter, knuckles going white. For a long moment he said nothing, and Dante could practically see the internal battle playing out. Confess or try to maintain the lie. Finally, James's shoulders sagged. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear to you, Mr. Moretti, I didn't know what they were planning." Dante's expression didn't change, but internally, anger burned hot and bright. "Explain. Everything. Now." The story came out in rushed, desperate sentences. James had been approached 6 months ago by someone claiming to represent a rival development firm. They'd offered him money for information. Just business intelligence, they'd said. Details about acquisitions, negotiation strategies. Nothing that would hurt anyone, they'd assured him. Just corporate espionage, the kind that happened every day. "I know it was wrong," James said miserably. "I knew it from the start, but I have student debt, my mother's medical bills. They offered me so much money and I thought it was just information about business deals. I never imagined." His voice broke. "Ms. Carter getting hurt, that was never supposed to happen. I would never." "Who approached you?" Dante's voice was ice cold. "A man named Robert Sullivan. He said he worked for Titan Development Group, but after what happened I tried to find him and, Mr. Moretti, Titan Development doesn't exist. It's a shell company. The whole thing was a setup, and I was stupid enough to fall for it. Dante absorbed this information, his mind already working through the implications. Someone had created an elaborate scheme to compromise James, to get information, to orchestrate an attack that would look like it came from the Castellanos. This wasn't just about eliminating Dante. This was about destabilizing the entire power structure. "You will tell Marcus everything," Dante said, his voice carefully controlled despite the rage simmering beneath. "Every meeting, every piece of information you shared, every detail you can remember about this Robert Sullivan. You will cooperate fully with our investigation. In exchange, your life will be spared." James's eyes widened with desperate hope. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti, thank you. I swear I'll—" "However," Dante continued, cutting him off, "you no longer work for me. You will be escorted to collect your personal belongings under supervision. You will sign the non-disclosure agreements our lawyers prepare, and you will never, under any circumstances, speak about anything you learned while in my organization. If you do, the mercy I'm showing you today will be rescinded. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, sir. I understand. One more thing, James." Dante leaned forward, his gray eyes boring into the younger man. "My secretary took a projectile meant for me because someone used information you provided. You may not have pulled the trigger, but her blood is on your hands nonetheless. You'll have to live with that. Now get out of my sight." After James was escorted out, Marcus joined Dante in the room. "We'll get everything we can from him," Marcus said. "The name Robert Sullivan is clearly fake, but maybe there's something in the meetings, the communications, a slip, a detail that could lead us to whoever's really behind this. Find them," Dante ordered. "I don't care how long it takes or what resources we need to use. Whoever did this, whoever put Amelie in that hospital bed, I want them found. Consider it done." Dante returned to the hospital as the sun was setting on the second day. The trusted nurse reported that there had been no changes, but that Emilie's vital signs remained strong. Dante thanked her and dismissed her, reclaiming his position beside the bed. "We're making progress," he told Emilie, taking her hand again. "We know who leaked the information now. A lawyer on my payroll who got played by someone smarter than him. We'll follow the trail, find out who's really responsible." He paused, studying her peaceful face. "But honestly, right now I don't care about any of that as much as I should. All I care about is you waking up. Everything else can wait." The admission felt significant. Dante Moretti, who had built his reputation on always putting business first, on never letting emotions cloud his judgment, was ready to let the world burn if it meant the woman in this bed opened her eyes. "I need you to come back, Emilie," he said softly. "I need you to wake up so I can tell you things I should have said a long time ago. So I can thank you for 3 years of loyalty and dedication. So I can—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "So I can tell you I love you." The realization had been creeping up on him for days, but now it crystallized with perfect clarity. He loved her, not just appreciated her, not just valued her professionally. He loved Emilie Carter, her quiet strength, her integrity, her competence, the way she challenged him while still supporting him, the way she'd made his life better without asking for anything in return. And he'd been too blind, too controlled, too afraid to see it until she'd nearly died. "Please wake up," he whispered. "Please, Emilie. I have so much to tell you." It happened at 2:47 a.m. on the third day. Dante had dozed off in the chair, his head resting on the edge of Emilie's bed, their hands still intertwined. He'd been dreaming. Something about the office, about Emilie bringing him coffee and smiling in that subtle way she had, when a sound pulled him back to consciousness. The machines were beeping faster, differently. Dante's head snapped up, instantly alert. Emilie's vital signs were changing on the monitors, her heart rate accelerating, her blood pressure dropping. Even as he watched, alarms began to sound. "Emilie." He stood, his hand tightening around hers. "Emilie, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Her breathing had become labored, her chest rising and falling with visible effort. The door burst open and Sarah rushed in, followed by 2 other nurses and Dr. Chen, who must have been making late rounds. "What's happening?" Dante demanded. But even as he asked, medical personnel were swarming around the bed, checking monitors, adjusting equipment. "Her oxygen saturation is dropping," Dr. Chen said, her voice clipped and professional. "Possible pulmonary embolism. We need to get her to imaging now. Mr. Moretti, you need to step back." "No, now!" Dr. Chen's voice cracked with authority. "We don't have time for discussion." Hands pulled Dante back as the bed was unlocked and began moving toward the door. He caught one last glimpse of Emily's pale face before they rushed her out of the room, leaving him standing in the sudden silence. Marcus appeared from nowhere. He must have been in the waiting area. What happened? I don't know. Dante's voice was hollow. She was stable. And then, the alarms. They said something about her lungs. She'll be okay, Marcus said. But even he sounded uncertain. The doctors know what they're doing. Dante walked to the window, staring out at the city lights without really seeing them. His hands were shaking. Actually shaking. Something that hadn't happened since he was a teenager facing down his first real threat. I can't lose her, Marcus, he said quietly. I can't. You won't. Emily's a fighter. You know that. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Dante paced the small room, unable to sit still, unable to think about anything except Emily struggling to breathe, Emily in danger, Emily possibly. No, he refused to even think it. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, Dr. Chen returned. Her expression was serious but not devastated, and Dante took that as a good sign. She's stable, Dr. Chen said immediately, and Dante felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. It was a small clot that had formed post-surgery. We caught it in time and administered treatment. She's on blood thinners now and we're monitoring her closely, but she should be fine. Can I see her? They're getting her settled back in ICU now. Give them 10 minutes. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. Mr. Moretti, I know this has been frightening, but complications like this, while serious, aren't uncommon after this type of trauma. We're on top of it. She's going to recover. When Dante was finally allowed back into the room, Emily looked even more fragile than before, with additional monitoring equipment surrounding her bed, but she was breathing easier, her chest rising and falling in a more natural rhythm. Dante sank into his chair and carefully took her hand again. You scared me, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Don't do that again, Emily. I can handle a lot of things, but I can't handle the thought of losing you. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Emily slept on, unaware of his vigil, unaware of how completely she'd upended his world. Dante settled in once more, determined not to leave her side until she opened her eyes and came back to him. Fight, he whispered, echoing his words from days ago. Keep fighting, Emily. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. And in the quiet of the hospital room, with dawn approaching and the city beginning to stir below, Dante Moretti made a silent vow. When Emily Carter woke up, everything would change. He would make sure she knew exactly what she meant to him, exactly how much he valued her, not just as his secretary, but as the woman who had somehow, impossibly, claimed his carefully guarded heart. He just needed her to wake up. The first thing Emily became aware of was pain, a dull, persistent ache in her left shoulder that seemed to radiate through her entire body. The second thing was light, too bright even through her closed eyelids, making her want to retreat back into the comfortable darkness of unconsciousness. But something was pulling her forward, keeping her from slipping away, a warmth around her right hand, a voice low and familiar, speaking words she couldn't quite make out yet. She focused on that voice, using it as an anchor. It took enormous effort to force her eyelids open, and when she finally managed it, the world was a blur of white and chrome and too bright fluorescent lighting. Emily. The voice sharpened into clarity, and with it a face came into focus. Dante Moretti leaned over her, his gray eyes wide with an emotion she'd never seen there before. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. Emily, can you hear me? His hand tightened around hers and she realized that's what the warmth was. His hand wrapped around hers like he'd been holding on for dear life. She tried to speak, but her throat was painfully dry, her voice nothing but a rasp. Dante immediately reached for a cup of water with a straw, bringing it to her lips with surprising gentleness. Small sips, he instructed, and she obeyed, the cool water soothing her parched throat. After a few sips, she managed to croak out, Mr. Moretti? Something flickered across his face. Was that pain? But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it, replaced by that careful control she knew so well. You're in the hospital, he said, his voice steady despite the intensity in his eyes. You've been unconscious for 2 weeks. Do you remember what happened? 2 weeks? Emily's foggy mind struggled to process that. She tried to piece together her last clear memories, the office, a meeting, men in suits, and then a gun, the flash of metal, movement. I jumped, she whispered, the memory crystallizing. Someone was going to. I had to protect you. Dante's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. Yes, you did. And you were shot because of it. The clinical way he said it didn't match the emotion swirling in his eyes. Emily tried to move to sit up, but pain lanced through her shoulder and she gasped. Don't move, Dante said quickly, his free hand gently pressing her back against the pillows. You had surgery. The doctor said you need to stay still while you heal. A nurse appeared, kind-faced with gentle hands, checking the monitors around Emily's bed. Welcome back, Ms. Carter. I'm Sarah. You gave us quite a scare. How are you feeling? Tired, Emily managed. And it hurts? That's normal. I'll get Dr. Chen and will adjust your pain medication. Sarah smiled warmly, but I have to say we're all very happy to see those eyes open. Especially Mr. Moretti here. He hasn't left your side in 2 weeks. Emily's gaze shifted back to Dante, really looking at him now. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, his suit wrinkled in a way she'd never seen before. Had he really been here the entire time? After Sarah left to fetch the doctor, silence stretched between them. Dante still held her hand, his thumb unconsciously tracing patterns on her skin. You should have been resting, Emily said quietly. Not staying here. I'm sure Marcus could have coordinated everything. Emily, Dante cut her off, his voice rough. Stop. Just stop being so damn selfless for 1 minute. She blinked, surprised by the intensity in his tone. You took a projectile for me, he continued, each word carefully controlled. You nearly died. You were in a coma for 2 weeks. And the first thing you do when you wake up is worry about whether I've been resting enough. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. His hand tightened around hers almost desperately. You have nothing to apologize for. If anyone should be apologizing, it's me. I failed to protect you. I put you in danger just by having you in that room. This is my fault. No. Emily's voice was stronger now despite her exhaustion. It was my choice. I saw what was happening and I chose to act. You didn't fail me, Mr. Moretti. I made my decision. Why? The question burst from him like he'd been holding it back for days. Why would you do that? Why would you risk your life for me? Because I love you, Emily thought, but the words stuck in her throat. Even now, groggy and in pain, she couldn't bring herself to cross that line. He was still her boss. She was still just his secretary. Nothing about that had changed, even if she'd taken a bullet for him. When she didn't answer, something in Dante's expression shifted. Hurt, maybe, or frustration. But before either of them could say more, Dr. Chen arrived with Sarah and the moment was lost in a flurry of medical examinations and questions. The next few days passed in a haze of recovery. Emily learned that she'd been incredibly lucky. The projectile had missed major arteries, though it had caused significant tissue damage. She'd need extensive physical therapy to regain full function of her left arm, but the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. Dante visited every day, usually staying for hours, but something had shifted between them since that first conversation. There was a tension now, a weight of unspoken words that hung in the air. He was unfailingly attentive, making sure she had everything she needed, coordinating with the medical staff, bringing her books and magazines to pass the time. But that raw emotion from her first waking moments had been locked away again behind his usual controlled demeanor. It was Marcus who finally gave her the full picture of what had happened while she'd been unconscious. Dante went to war for you, Marcus said bluntly, sitting in the visitor's chair one afternoon while Dante was handling a business call outside. The man who tried to hurt you, the people who planned it, he dismantled their entire operation. Methodically. Completely. Emily's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Marcus studied her carefully. I mean he used every resource at his disposal to find out who was responsible and ensure they could never threaten you or anyone else again. It wasn't pretty, Emily, and it cost him. Alliances he'd spent years building, strategic positions he'd carefully cultivated. He burned it all down to protect you. But why? The question came out as barely a whisper. I'm just his secretary. Are you really asking me that? Marcus's expression was almost pitying. Emily, you're a smart woman. Surely you've noticed the way he looks at you. The way he's looked at you for the past year at least. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. Marcus, He loves you, Marcus said simply. He probably doesn't even realize how obvious it is to everyone except the two of you. But those of us who've known Dante for years, we see it. The way he listens when you speak. The way his entire demeanor softens when you enter a room. The fact that he spent 2 weeks sleeping in a hospital chair because he couldn't bear to leave your side. He never said anything, Emily whispered. Dante doesn't know how to express emotions like that. He was raised in a world where feelings are weaknesses to be exploited. But actions? Actions he understands. And his actions have been screaming what he feels for you. Before Emily could process this revelation, Dante returned and Marcus smoothly changed the subject. But the words stayed with her, echoing in her mind. A week after waking up, Emily was moved from ICU to a regular room. She was sitting up now, able to feed herself with her right hand, though her left arm remained immobilized against her chest. The physical therapy had begun, painful sessions where she had to relearn basic movements, but she approached it with the same determination she brought to everything. Dante arrived one evening with a folder of documents. "I thought you might want to know what's been happening with the business," he said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "You don't have to brief me," Emily said. "I'm on medical leave. I'm sure your temporary assistant is handling everything." "The temporary assistant is adequate at best," Dante replied, a hint of his usual dry humor showing through. "She doesn't anticipate my needs the way you do. She doesn't reorganize my filing system without permission." Despite herself, Emily smiled slightly. "I still can't believe you didn't fire me for that." "Best decision I never made," Dante said, and there was something in his tone that made her breath catch. He opened the folder, pulling out several documents. "But I do want to discuss something with you. Your role, when you return." "When I return?" Emily echoed. "Of course when you return. Did you think I'd replace you?" Dante's expression was almost offended. "Emily, you're irreplaceable. But after everything that's happened, I think we need to make some changes." He spread out the documents. New security protocols, enhanced protection measures, a restructuring of how information was compartmentalized within his organization. "I'm implementing a complete overhaul of our security systems," Dante explained. "What happened to you revealed vulnerabilities I should have addressed years ago. From now on, anyone in a position of trust will have enhanced protection. That includes you. Mr. Moretti, I don't need—" "Yes, you do." His voice was firm. "You were targeted, Emily. Not randomly, but specifically, because someone knew that hurting you would hurt me." The admission hung in the air between them. Emily's pulse quickened. "What are you saying?" Dante set down the documents, meeting her gaze directly. "I'm saying that you've become important to the organization, to me, and that makes you a target. I can't change that, but I can ensure you're protected. I don't want to live like a prisoner," Emily said quietly. "Surrounded by security, unable to live my life normally. I'm not asking you to be a prisoner. I'm asking you to let me keep you safe." Dante's jaw tightened. "I can't go through that again, Emily. Watching you bleed out on my office floor, sitting beside your hospital bed for 2 weeks wondering if you'd ever wake up. I can't." The raw honesty in his voice made Emily's throat tight. "And if I say no? If I tell you I don't want the enhanced security, the protection detail? Then I'd respect your choice," Dante said, though every line of his body suggested how difficult that would be for him. "But I'd also have to ask you to consider whether continuing to work for me is the right decision. If you won't let me protect you and your position makes you vulnerable, then perhaps you'd be safer elsewhere." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. "You'd fire me? I'd release you from your contract with a recommendation that would get you any position you wanted, anywhere in the city," Dante clarified. "I'd make sure you were financially secure. But yes, if it meant keeping you safe, I would let you go." Emily stared at him, seeing the conflict in his expression, the struggle between wanting to keep her close and wanting to keep her safe. "What do you want, Mr. Moretti?" she asked quietly. "Not what's logical, not what's strategic. What do you want?" For a long moment, Dante said nothing. Then slowly he reached out and took her hand. Not the professional gesture of comfort he'd offered before, but something more deliberate, more intimate. "I want you safe," he said, his voice low. "I want you alive. I want you to look at me without fear, without pain. I want—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I want things I have no right to want, Emily." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Like what?" "Like you staying in my life. Not just as my secretary, but—" Dante's thumb traced over her knuckles, the gesture achingly gentle. "But I also want you to have the choice to leave if that's what's best for you, even if it kills me to let you go." "And if I don't want to leave?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "If I want to stay despite the danger, then you accept the protection," Dante said firmly. "Non-negotiable." Because I will not watch you get hurt again." Before Emily could respond, her hospital room door opened. Marcus entered, his expression grave in a way that immediately put both of them on alert. "We have a problem," Marcus said without preamble. "The Luciano family just sent a message. They know about the investigation. They know we've been dismantling the network behind the attack, and they're claiming that we've violated territorial agreements in the process." Dante was on his feet immediately, his entire demeanor shifting to the commanding presence Emily knew from the boardroom. "What kind of message?" "The kind that suggests they're planning retaliation," Marcus said grimly. "They've demanded a meeting, tomorrow night. Neutral territory. It's a trap," Dante said flatly. "Probably, but if we don't show, it's a sign of weakness. And weakness invites aggression from every other family in the city." Emily watched the exchange, her mind racing. The Luciano family. She'd heard the name before in the context of Dante's business dealings. They were one of the other major organizations in New York, rivals who maintained a tense peace through carefully negotiated boundaries. "You can't go alone," she said, drawing both men's attention. "I won't be alone," Dante assured her. "I'll have security, and Marcus will be there. That's not enough. If it's a trap, they'll be expecting your usual protocols. You need to approach this differently." "Emily, you're in a hospital bed," Dante said, his tone suggesting she was being unreasonable. "You're in no position to think strategically?" she interrupted, her voice sharp despite her exhaustion. "I may be injured, Mr. Moretti, but my brain still works. Let me help." Dante and Marcus exchanged a look. Then, to Emily's surprise, Dante pulled up a chair and sat down. "All right, what are you thinking?" Over the next hour, the three of them discussed strategy. Emily, drawing on 3 years of managing Dante's complex negotiations and understanding the delicate balance of his world, suggested approaches that neither man had considered. Use the meeting as an opportunity to gather intelligence. Bring someone the Lucianos wouldn't expect. Perhaps someone who seemed unimportant but could observe without drawing attention. Turn their trap into a strategic advantage. "This is exactly why I need you back," Dante said when they finally concluded their planning. There was admiration in his voice and something warmer. "Your mind, Emily, the way you see patterns and possibilities that others miss. It's just logic," she said, though she couldn't help the small flush of pleasure at his praise. "It's brilliance," Dante corrected, "and it's one of the many reasons why." He stopped, glancing at Marcus, then back to Emily. "Why you're invaluable to this organization." After Marcus left to begin implementing their strategy, Dante remained. Night had fallen over the city, and the hospital had settled into its quieter evening rhythm. "Get some rest," Dante said, standing. "I'll be back tomorrow." "Mr. Moretti," Emily's voice stopped him at the door. "Be careful tomorrow, please." He turned back, and in the dim light of the room, his expression was unguarded. "I will. I have too many reasons to come back safely now." The weight of his gaze made Emily's breath catch. She wanted to ask him to stay, to tell him all the things Marcus had suggested were true, that her feelings went so far beyond professional respect that it terrified her. But before she could find the words, he was gone, leaving her alone with the monitors beeping softly and the city lights glowing through her window. And as she drifted toward sleep, one thought circled through her mind. She loved Dante Moretti, had loved him for longer than she wanted to admit. The question was whether she was brave enough to tell him, and whether he felt the same way. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring answers. For better or worse, the careful distance they'd maintained for 3 years was crumbling, and whatever came next would change everything between them. She just hoped they both survived long enough to figure out what that meant. The meeting with the Luciano family went better than expected. Dante's strategic approach, transparency combined with strength, had resulted in a new understanding between the organizations. The threat had been neutralized through diplomacy rather than confrontation, proving that sometimes intelligence won over force. When Dante returned to the hospital that night, Emily saw the relief in his eyes before he even spoke. "It's over," he said simply, settling into the chair beside her bed. "The Lucianos agreed to a truce. We're safe." "We?" Emily repeated softly. Dante took her hand, and this time there was no hesitation in the gesture. "Emily, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said weeks ago before any of this happened." Her heart raced as she met his gaze. "I love you," Dante said, the words raw and honest. "I've loved you for longer than I want to admit. Watching you nearly die made me realize I've been a fool. keeping you at arm's length, pretending professionalism could hide what I felt. I love you, Emily Carter, not as my secretary, but as the woman who changed my entire world. Tears pricked Emily's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. I have for so long. I thought it was impossible, that we were from different worlds. We make our own world, Dante interrupted, leaning closer. If you'll have me, if you can accept the life I lead, the dangers that come with it, I'll protect you with everything I have, but I need to know. Is this what you want? Yes. Emily's answer was immediate, certain. I want you, Dante. All of you. The danger, the complexity, everything. I made my choice when I stepped in front of that weapon. I'm making it again now. Dante cupped her face gently, mindful of her injuries, and kissed her. Soft, reverent, full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Then we do this together. Partners. In everything. Partners. Emily agreed, smiling through her tears. 6 months later, Emily stood in Dante's office, their office now, reviewing the quarterly reports. Her shoulder had healed well and she'd returned to work 3 months ago, though her role had evolved. She was no longer just his secretary, she was his partner, in every sense of the word. Dante entered, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, pressing a kiss to her temple. Ready to go home? He murmured. Always, she replied, turning in his embrace to kiss him properly. They'd built something beautiful from the ashes of that terrible day, a relationship based on trust, respect, and a love that had survived the ultimate test. And as they left the office together, hand in hand, Emily knew she'd make the same choice 1,000 times over, because some souls were worth saving, and Dante Moretti's belonged to her, just as hers belonged to him.